Okay, welcome everyone to Council-Led Housing Forum. Thank you for joining us this morning. Council-Led Housing Forum was set up to support London boroughs who are building new council-led homes. And today's session is about effective procurement. And this is a topic that comes up almost in every session in some shape or form, something that everyone tells us is a challenge. So we're really pleased to be taking the topic this morning. And particularly some of you who've been involved with us a long time might remember that we had a session planned last March, March the 17th, when we had to obviously cancel quite short notice. So we're really pleased to be back today doing this. So just to let you know, if I just move myself on, actually, there we go, there's me, introduce myself. I'm Visca Sri Chandrasekara and I'm the Council-Led Housing Forum Manager. We also have three sponsors without whom these sessions couldn't run. So we have Potter Raper, BPTW and Red Loft. And you'll be meeting people from those three organisations because they support us not just financially, but actually with a lot of their knowledge and advice, which we will be using today, and you'll see that later. Okay, so I'm really delighted that we've got Nicola Tilbury, director at Potter Raper, a very experienced employer's agent and works extensively with local authorities. So really does have a lot of knowledge about some of the challenges and processes which are different. They're not the same within local authorities as they are in other sectors. And I'm not going to say anymore. I'm going to let Nicola say a few more words about her experience and take us straight into her slides.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Visca, and thank you to Future of London for the opportunity to speak today, really. Yeah, I'm a director at Potter Raper and I've got a particular fascination about procurement. I don't say that I know everything about it, but I do know that if the foundations of a project start well, there's a really good chance of success. And these foundations do start with an effective procurement idea and strategy. So if we can start with the first slide, please. Thanks. Procurement is a complex topic, no doubt about that, and I could talk for hours on it. So it's definitely not something we can cover in 25 minutes. So today what I wanted to do was pull out some of the key points that a development manager particularly needs to be aware of to allow you to improve the effectiveness of your procurements on your individual projects. Now, I understand we've got a mix of knowledge in the audience with junior and senior development staff and some procurement officers as well. So it was tricky on working out how to pitch this. So I'm hoping that it will be of interest to everyone and there'll be something to take away for everybody. There's more opportunity for more detailed discussion during the workshop part of the event, as Visca said, later on and after the tea break. So I'm going to start briefly with setting out what procurement is, because I'm sure that you all do know, but there are some common misconceptions about it. I'll then go on to public procurement and what makes you guys as local authorities a bit special. Now, these rules are in a bit of a state of flux at the moment, with the UK departing from the EU in December of last year. And we all thought that not a lot was going to change, but it has. And in the some of the slides later on, we'll go through what's already happened and what is going to happen potentially. And then one of the very key points that Visca said earlier on is that looking at when you should be thinking about your procurement during the project life cycle. And I'm going to touch on the appointment of not just your contractors, but also consultants and surveys, investigations and suppliers too. And then we'll round off with a summary of what I think are the key considerations that you need to think about for effective procurement. Next slide, please. So looking at what is procurement, and procurement is a kind of a global term in construction for the selection and appointment of construction activities. Now that's whether it's a contractor or a consultant or a supplier. So if we can just go into the main next slide. Much has been written about public procurement over the years, and much of it is looking about how to fix a dysfunctional process that we've been carrying on for a long time. And the fact that it's still going on shows it's not very straightforward. So indeed, when you're thinking about effective procurement, it's influenced by so many factors. But one of the basic things to do is to really understand the process that you need to go through for your procurement cycle, which is what's shown on the screen at the moment. It happens in a number of stages. And the first stage really is the one at the top, is the procurement planning. And it's at this stage that all the hard work is done for your organisation and the authority, and where a procurement strategy and a policy should be formed. Now, this should be looked at as a set of guidelines for you on an individual project and a development officer basis to follow when it comes to looking at stage 2, and that's looking at the definition of the requirements for that particular project that you're looking at. And once those requirements are set, it should then be comparatively easy to move on to stage 3 and the publication and tendering of the opportunity. I'll cover tendering in a little bit more detail later. The next stage, stage 4, is looking at the evaluation and selection of the supplier before moving to step 5 or stage 5 and the contract award. But procurement doesn't just stop once you've awarded a contract. It should carry on into stage 6, and that's the implementation and management of the contract. It should be measured against a set of criteria that you set right at the beginning, at the planning and the definition and the requirements, and KPIs to evaluate if the procurement process, by the time you pop out at the end, was it a success? Did it meet the criteria that you set? Did it meet the criteria and objectives of the organisation within your own organisational procurement policy? If we can just do the next bit, please. Hopefully I'm going to have, that's it, and the next one, please. Great. So these 2 first stages are really where the client should focus the most energy and effort to get right. By allowing enough time and proper consideration of the place where you want to end up, you're more likely to implement a successful project. When I was thinking about this, I was just thinking, if you're going to go out for the day, you'd plan your journey, you'd check if the car had enough fuel or if you had the right train ticket. You might decide where you might want to eat, or if you're going to take a picnic with you. You check the weather and wear the appropriate clothing, because if you didn't do these things, you run the risk of getting wet, hungry, or lost. Sounds straightforward, but I'm always amazed at the lack of planning that can sometimes go into embarking on a construction project. And I see this all the time, and I still see this now. Next slide, please, Vitka. So the role of the client, as I said, is paramount in those 2 early phases of the procurement cycle. An understanding of the governance structure of your organisation. What gateways do you need to follow? What requirements do you need for those gateways? What standing orders have you got that you need to meet? I.e., can you get 3 quotes under a certain level? Can you go to direct award? Does it need to go on Contracts Finder? What committees and boards does it need to go through to get sign-off? Getting the client brief right and clear. Now, anybody who's come to these events and has heard me speak before, I do emphasise the importance of getting a clear client brief, and it's communicated to all stakeholders because it's essential. If you don't know where you want to end up, how do you know how you're going to get there? What does success look like for you? What represents value? What political drivers are there for the project? All these things fit into that client brief. Your attitude to risk is hugely important when looking at procurement and choosing the right route for you. Your risk attitude needs to be defined. It needs to be signed up to. How much experience have you got within the organisation to run a procurement route? There's no point looking at running a partnering PPC 2000 necessarily if you've got absolutely no experience of it. How is viability calculated? Identifying the risks at a very early stage to you as an organisation is super, super important. And then finally, what is your procurement strategy within your authority? Do you have one even? Do you know where it is? Have you read it? Do you know when it was last reviewed? Because this needs to be consistently looked at to make sure that you are keeping up with the times and it still fits your organisational aims. And companies such as Potter Raper, who are going to be, you would appoint to help advise you and guide you through that cycle, through that process, they can't do your job for you. They'll be able to help you and advise you on the choices that are available and advise on the pros and cons and present recommendations, but only if they've got a clear understanding of the principles, aims and objectives as you as the local authority. Next slide. I've called this horses for courses. There isn't a one size fits all, and there are many things to consider when you're coming up with a procurement strategy and thinking about things that you have to do. Don't just use a procurement strategy or a procurement choice or a tendering method just because it's the newfangled thing to do, or because that's what you've always done and you don't know how to do anything else. There are a number of elements that need to be considered when you're putting together a policy and a strategy for an organisation, and it starts with setting out clear aims and objectives, such as delivering value for money, improving relationships with stakeholders and suppliers, meeting high procurement standards. Think about how much money your organisation spends on procurement, and any efficiencies that can be made can have a really big impact. A good place to start is to consider factors that can affect your strategy. So there's lots of current things that are going on in the market at the moment. So things like health and safety and well-being of the people that live in the buildings and the people and staff engaged to build them. Changes since the Hackett report, building in safety, like the fire safety bill. This is changing how we define value for a scheme when considering the brief. Sustainable and ethical procurement are becoming buzzwords now. So looking at how to bring in innovation such as off-site manufacture or modular manufacture, how do you consider specialist modular constructor frameworks? I mean, Fusion 21 and a couple of others have got these now. You're starting to see this kind of stuff evolving. And social value is becoming a bigger and bigger part of public procurement, especially since the construction playbook and some of the most recent procurement notes have come out from government. So you need to consider how it affects the particular project that you're working on. Without a comprehensive procurement strategy in place, it's impossible to know whether or not your procurement organisation is aligned with the corporate strategy and whether or not you're actually making any progress. Clients should always look at their procurement strategies on the basis of the project priorities, management capability, and the extent of the risk that they are prepared to accept. So some of these are on the screen now. External factors are looking at things like economic, commercial, technical, political, social, and legal factors, which influence your business and your project teams throughout the life cycle, such as changes in interest rate, foreign rate, exchange rates now with Brexit, tariffs coming involved. And changes in legislation, they can all affect costs and time. And your procurement and construction knowledge within your organisation, within your development team and within your procurement team. So your experience of procuring building construction projects and the environment within which it operates will influence your processes that you'll choose. So they'll be influenced by the nature and the culture of the organisation. As I said, risk approach is very important, and how much you want to be involved with the project is also a major consideration. Looking at the ability to make change. Now, ideally, you should identify the needs that you have right at the beginning of the project, but you can't always do that, especially if you're looking at a really big, extensive regeneration project, which may run over many years. Changes in technology may mean that you would bring in changes halfway through a construction project to improve innovation, to improve costs and time. But changes invariably result in increased costs and time, and especially if they occur during the construction period. So it's kind of really important at the outset to choose the level to which you think design might need to be completed before you start, and any changes that you might impose as you move through the project. Cost issues, of course, are going to be a big factor. And you really do need to think about price certainty and when you want price certainty. And again, it's a whole topic in itself, but you need to allow the time that's taken from the initial estimate to when the tenders are received, the extent to which design is completed, because that will influence the cost at the time of tender, And if price certainty is required, then really design needs to be complete before construction starts, or there needs to be a sufficient amount of detail in the design and build contract to minimize how many changes will be needed post-contract without the contractor dumbing down any design. But time is critical. Most projects are needed within a specific time frame, but you've got to allow adequate time to plan and design. Don't rush through those early stages, because costs will just start mounting up, because changes will happen once you've moved into the construction phase. Allowing enough time for planning approvals to go through the system, especially if it's a controversial site, needs to be considered and really thought about. So I can't emphasize enough really thinking and allowing enough time at the beginning to plan it and get it right in the first place. Unrealistic timescales are going to actually add cost, because your design team, your project team won't be able to keep up the pace, and delays will incur, and you'll get costs from your contractors. New slide, please. Right, looking at the kind of types of project and procurement approaches that you can actually be looking at. There are kind of 4 main types of choice here, which are influenced by time, cost, quality triangle, and really importantly by, as I've said, your risk management approach. The top 3 really are the ones that you will know about. Traditional, where you've done the design and the contractor builds it. Design and build, where you've then got single point responsibility and the contractor designs and builds it with a set of employers' requirements, although consistently we are seeing design and build being taken to stage 3+, which has its own issues. Or there's management forms of contract, where discrete packages of the project are designed by the client team and then managed by the coordination is done by the client under construction management, or by the contractor under management contracting. But there's also the ability to use a collaborative approach. And this is not technically a procurement approach as such in its own right, but it's something that can be integrated with the other 3 routes that are listed above. And collaboration, partnering, early contractor involvement methods, they're not something that we're really going to look at today. And they're quite diversive in how people look and think about them. But they're definitely something to take into consideration when you're looking at your procurement policies and strategies, because if used correctly, in some instances, there is benefits to using it. The other factors and influences on what you're going to be doing will resolve around the type of project that you've got. Is it land-led? Is it a Section 106? The complexity, the size, the location, the uniqueness of the building construction. What are the drivers politically? Are you being led to look at innovation and modular construction? Are you looking at reducing your carbon footprint? All of these things will influence the route of procurement that you're going to go down, with the risks associated with each of those and how they can help you. In terms of design and delivery responsibility, really, really important. D&B is a favoured choice, because you've got that single point responsibility of all the risks sitting with the contractor for design and delivery, compared to management forms, which aren't as popular with clients because the risk sits with the client. However, if you have a very experienced client body, you can make that work, and it can be cost effective. Look at private developers, for example. They do all of it via a management form of contract. What will the contractual structure look like? Thinking about working with a developer, perhaps looking at selling private sale units and cross-funding the affordable units that you've got, or working within a JV structure, or just going it alone. These are all things that will influence that procurement strategy. Or even, are you looking at a strategic procurement process? We work with one of our clients and we do have exactly that. We've got a PPC 2000 strategic, but it's a traditional form of contract, but it runs over the whole pipeline of work for 7 years. Or are you looking at a project by project procurement that you're looking at? Very different things to consider. Next slide. Conscious that I'm running out of time. You've also procurement, while it's a global term for all of this stuff, within procurement, tendering and contract choice are 2 separate things. The choices available that you've got, single stage, competitive, and negotiated. Can you direct award? Can you use a framework, either your own or an accessible one? But then you've also got two-stage options utilising a PCSA, which is a form of early contractor involvement. But again, the most suitable choice should be made against the particular requirements of your project. So it's going back to that cycle and getting those first bits right, really understanding what it is you need from your project. Same with the contract choice. You can use any, really. The contract choices doesn't really influence things that much. Common forms obviously are to use the bespoke JCT or an NEC, but if you're looking at JVs or Section 106s, you will be looking at bespoke development agreements. And if you really push comes to shove, letters of intent, not ideally suited really to use if you can avoid it, but sometimes you do need to do it. Indeed, your procurement policy and your strategy may outlaw them, so you can't. But they can have their place if they're used in the right situation for the right reason and actually drafted in the right way. Next slide, please. So public procurement, what makes you guys different? Next slide. One of the key things is that you need to comply with public procurement regulations. And these are the regulations that turn EU directives into UK law. It gives you a prescriptive timetable and structure for tendering that needs to be followed. And it will also sit alongside your standing orders. And there are various key features that distinguish public procurement from private. So the need to be transparent and accountable, to demonstrate fair competition and no discrimination between the tenderers and the suppliers. Providing value for money. Now, this is often referred to as the most economically advantageous tender or meet, but that's starting to change. And then the requirement to comply with the Social Value Act becoming bigger and bigger part of what public sector procurement needs to do and meet. Now, one of the options available is to comply with the public contract regulations is to choose a procedure from the regulations, or use your own framework of contractors, or use a framework of contractors that's already been set up through a process that complies with the public procurement regulation and meets those targets above that I've just shown you. So you could use things like the Crown Commercial Services Framework, Fusion 21, the GLA's London Development Panel. There are many, many to choose from that can allow you to still meet your obligations. Next slide. So this is very quickly running through, and I'm sure you are all very aware of these, but these are still the threshold figures for EU procurement or public contract procurement regulations coming into force. So for your consultants, you're looking at 189 grand. For works contracts, anything above 4.7 million. Now that isn't changing with anything that's happening. The public procurement regulations in the UK go beyond EU directives and includes items around below threshold contracts, which I'm not going to go into today, but they are something that needs to be taken into consideration. Next slide, please. So you're going to be familiar with these. The open, when you go straight to ITT, but you've got no control over the number of responses that you get back. Restricted process, where you get a selection questionnaire, which is a standard set questionnaire that you can use. So there's lots of help and assistance with that. And you can add to it as you need to reduce the list that you invite to tender. Or you've got a competitive with negotiation or competitive dialogue, where you want to negotiate with a few or one contractor to move forward. They're the ones that you're most likely to use. The innovation partnership that's up there is really tricky to use, and it has to be in a situation where you cannot do it in any other way. And anybody I've spoken to, just like nobody can really use it. So it's quite difficult. You need to be very bespoke as to what you're doing. Opportunity of using frameworks gives you a predefined list of contractors who've been selected in accordance with the regulations, so you don't have to worry. Gives you more flexibility in your appointments, and you can speed up the appointment process. However, with changes that have been made to the public regulations, speed isn't quite so much of an issue anymore. With PIN notices and doing e-tendering, you can move things quite quickly. Some of the contractors on the list are those that you want to work with, or you might prefer to select your own. Some frameworks offer more suitable contractors for the type of work you need more than others. And your consultants should be able to offer advice on this, because they would have worked with the majority of the contractors on most of the accessible frameworks. But again, which one you need to use depends on the definition of the requirements of the projects. Again, horses for courses, the same with the right contractor for the right job will influence how successful that your jobs are. Alternatives for frameworks for a lot of local authorities is and HAs is dynamic purchasing systems for consultants, suppliers and contractors. And most of those are accessible as well. Right, the next slide, please, Bisca. This is going through some of the changes to public contracts net regulations now with Brexit and what's happened. So there's this aptly titled Public Procurement Amendment, etc. EU Exit Regulations, nice mouthful, has brought in a lot of changes. This came into play on the 31st of December of last year, where we are now not using the OJU to publish all your notices. You need to be using something called Find a Tender Service. It's confusing because this new regime only applies to new procurement. So if you'd already started, so you'd launched a procurement, but you haven't finished it and haven't awarded it, you still use Contracts Finder, you still use the OJU publications to do it. Your providers also need to register to use Find a Tender Services because they might not be able to get access to it. And in some situations, even you might need to replicate the notices that you've got on both of them. It's a bit of a minefield, but there's a way through it and your procurement team should be able to help you with this. There's also been a plethora of procurement notices as well recently on social value, below threshold contracts and payment approaches moving forward, but also the construction playbook. So this kind of replaces Construction 2025 with lots of the ways in which public procurement really should be gone about. They're worth reading and taking on board. Next slide. There's also more to come. There's a green paper, Transforming Public Procurement, that's just, I think, closed its consultation now, where they're looking at changing the procurement principles in quite a dramatic way. They're looking at new principles which go beyond 3 that the EU regulations have. They're looking at one set of rules for everyone, looking at reducing the numbers of procedures that we can have available to just open, competitive, flexible, and then limited tendering. Changes to evaluation criteria, taking away that most economic advantageous tender. They're changing that to just the most advantageous tender. So of trying to avoid that race to the bottom. There's changes to frameworks, becoming a little bit more flexible and changing how long they run for, who can come in and out of them. More requirements on public procurement to hold data centrally. That's going to be a big change for most people. Improvements to prompt payment, again, consistent theme that comes out. And then they're looking at how to change VEET notices, which will be influential when you're looking at 106s. Next slide. So when do you think about all of this stuff? It actually procurement wraps around the whole construction process if it's considered properly. And hopefully in the next slide, Fisika will show how this works. So right from stage 1 through to stage 7, when you're thinking about it at stage 1, at your inception, think about your procurement strategy, think about your project brief, think about your design team appointments, your surveys, your investigations, who you need to use, how you want to get them, and your risk management approach, really critical to the procurement process. And then moving through into the design, you then get detailed project briefs, you firm up a little bit more, you get those surveys and investigations in. And by the time you get to stage 4, which is the tender process for the main contractor and the contract documents, again, they would have all been set out right at that early stage in your strategic brief about what you wanted and where you want to end up. When you get to stage 5 and you're on site, you're going to start thinking about your maintenance contracts. You're going to start thinking of your managing agents and your service charges, your service providers. So car charging, utilities, heat metering and billing. How is that all going to be set up? They're all things that are going to happen in stage 7 when you're in use, but you need to start thinking about them early in the process, especially when it comes to heat metering and billing, because there's various construction activities that need to take place around that. If you need to get an ESCO account into place, that takes time. And then by the time you get to stage 7, looking at the lessons learned, going back to those KPIs, have you met and have you ended up where you wanted to be, and did it work? and feeding that back into the process, back into your procurement strategy, your procurement policy, to evaluate how effective you were and could you make it better next time. Next slide, please. So I am a little bit over time, so I'm just going to go on to the last slide and just go through with some of the things, hopefully from that lot, that I'd like you to take away and just keep in mind when you carry out your next procurement. So next slide. So know your procurement strategy. Use it. It's there to help. It's there to ensure that you're picking the right procurement, the right tendering and the right contract for your project. Don't make it difficult. It doesn't need to be difficult. Normally simple is better, and everybody understands what's going on. Know what represents value for you. If it's the quality of the scheme, if it's the reduced carbon footprint, if it's the use of innovation, modular construction, then use that as your value. If it is the cheapest, use that as your value, but be quite honest about it. And then allowing appropriate timescales. Just make sure you've got enough time up front, because that's the point at which you will make the most efficiencies within your procurement. That's your opportunity to make it work, so take it. And use your consultants for advice. They will have worked with a lot of the contractors that you're looking at. They will have used various procurement options with various clients and can see the good, bad and the ugly, and will know which ones work and which ones haven't worked and why, to help you stop you falling into the same trap. Talk to other local authorities and attend events like this. Share. So the workshop session afterwards were really invaluable for you, I think. And I think these last two are really one of my big takeaways, really. So Jessica, if you can just move me on a little bit. And that's it. Preparation and planning is essential. So again, going back to that circular process chart, the planning, the procurement planning and defining your requirements at the start are absolutely key. And then the last one, I said, is one size does not fit all. You really do have to choose the most appropriate procurement process to fit your project. And I think I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicola. I think we gave you quite a really tough challenge then to cover all of that material in quite a tight time scale, and you've done it really well. So it is a huge topic, and there is a lot to do, a lot to take in. I think those last two things, the preparation and planning, is essential. Something we all know, but it's so hard sometimes, and probably because for a lot of our participants, there's political pressures to get things moving, get things on site. You know, housing, we've got a crisis, we need more of it, and we need it tomorrow. So it's great to have the reminders about how important the preparation is. And of course, the complexity of all of this is, as you put it, really on your last point, one size does not fit all. So really big thank you, Nicola, for taking on that tough challenge and doing a great presentation for us. I'm going to say goodbye to our YouTube audience. So we've been recording this, and our live audience will hopefully want to come back and watch it again. It was a very good presentation. But we say goodbye to the YouTube audience at this point.